The gavel felt impossibly heavy in Judge Marcus Sterling's hand, a leaden weight of authority he suddenly wished he could cast aside. In the dusty, sun-bleached courtroom of Redemption Gulch, the air was thick not just with the scent of dry timber and old paper, but with a palpable despair that emanated from the woman at the defendant's table. Her name was Abigail, and her face, though etched with exhaustion, held a quiet dignity that pricked at his conscience. Beside her, 3 small figures stood like a miniature phalanx, their shoulders squared, their faces a mixture of fear and fierce loyalty. The Triplets. His eyes, shielded by a carefully constructed mask of judicial indifference, kept snagging on their determined little faces. The plaintiff, a landowner named Blackwood with a face like a clenched fist, was speaking, his voice a droning litany of legalisms and thinly veiled contempt. The agreement was clear, Your Honor. The rent is 3 months in arrears. The law is the law. She and her brood must be evicted, but Marcus barely heard him. His focus was on the defiant little boy who suddenly took a step forward, his small hands balled into fists. It was Samuel. You can't take our ma from our home, the boy's voice rang out, shockingly clear and strong in the hushed room. It's all we have. The word struck Marcus with the force of a physical blow. A strange, forgotten ache bloomed in his chest. It was more than just a boy defending his mother, it was an echo from a past he had buried under years of wealth, power, and deliberate forgetting. He gripped the gavel tighter, his knuckles white, the polished wood feeling as cold and unforgiving as the secret shame that now threatened to claw its way into the light. The boy's eyes, a startlingly familiar shade of hazel, were fixed on him, not just with a plea, but with an accusation that seemed to see right through the judge's robes and into the hollow space where his heart used to be. The flashback began not with a dramatic crash, but with the quiet, relentless drip of hardship, like rain seeping through a leaky roof. Months earlier, Abigail's world had shrunk to the 4 peeling walls of her small cabin, a forgotten structure huddled at the edge of the vast prairie, as if ashamed to be seen by the proper town of Redemption Gulch. The wind whispered through cracks in the walls, a constant reminder of their fragility. Her life was a metronome of tireless work, her fingers often raw from mending the townsfolk's clothes and linens for mere pennies. Yet, the pile of coins in the earthenware jar never seemed to grow. It was a life measured in patched elbows and reheated stew, but it was a life filled with a fierce, luminous love. Her children, her triplets, were the suns around which her universe revolved. Caleb, the quiet one, would devour any book he could find, his mind a sanctuary from their poverty. Leah, with a spirit as gentle as a new dawn, tended to their small patch of wilting herbs and offered comfort with a wisdom that defied her 7 years. And Samuel, her little protector, spent his days practicing with a crude slingshot, vowing to fend off any danger, be it a rattlesnake or the looming shadow of Mr. Blackwood. The landowner was a danger far more venomous than any snake. He would appear without warning, his polished boots a stark insult to their dusty floorboards, his voice dripping with scorn as he demanded the rent. This isn't a charity, Abigail, he'd sneer, his eyes cataloguing every sign of their struggle with satisfaction. This land is worth something. You are not. Each visit left Abigail feeling smaller, the weight of his cruelty pressing down on her until it was hard to breathe. She would clutch the small, tarnished silver locket she always wore around her neck, its cool metal a small anchor in a sea of anxiety. The pressure from Blackwood intensified, becoming a slow, grinding siege on their fragile existence. He was no longer content to make his demands in the relative privacy of their cabin, he began to orchestrate public humiliations. He would stop Abigail in the middle of the dusty main street, his voice loud enough for all to hear, questioning her ability to provide for her children, suggesting they'd be better off in an orphanage. The townspeople would avert their eyes, their silence a chorus of complicity. During one such encounter outside the general store, as Blackwood mocked the meager contents of her basket, the triplets, who had been waiting by the door, marched forward. A man's worth isn't measured by the coin in his pocket, Mr. Blackwood, Caleb stated, his voice steady, clutching a tattered copy of a primer as if it were a holy text. It's measured by the kindness in his heart, Leah added, her eyes wet but her voice firm, and your heart, sir, seems to be a very small, dark place. Samuel, ever the defiant one, simply stood in front of his mother, a small, unmovable shield. The incident only fueled Blackwood's rage, his vanity wounded by the precocious courage of children. A week later, the sheriff delivered the official eviction notice. The court date was set. Meanwhile, miles away on a sprawling ranch that stretched to the horizon, Judge Marcus Sterling sat in his study, the room filled with the scent of rich leather and loneliness. He stared at a small, delicately painted portrait of a young woman, her hair the color of spun wheat, her eyes the same hazel as the boy in his courtroom. The boy he didn't yet know was his son. A wave of profound, suffocating regret washed over him, a familiar ghost that his wealth could never exorcise. He thought of a promise made under a starlit sky, a promise broken by fear and the blinding ambition of a young man who chose land and legacy over love. The night before the hearing was a crucible of quiet desperation. The moon cast long, skeletal shadows through the cabin's single window, and the silence was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the frantic beating of Abigail's heart. She sat at the rickety table, the eviction notice spread before her like a death sentence. All her fight had drained away, replaced by a cold, numbing despair. She had failed them. Her children, her beautiful, brave children, would be turned out onto the street with nothing but the threadbare clothes on their backs because she wasn't strong enough, wasn't enough. Tears she had refused to shed in front of Blackwood now fell freely, splashing onto the cruel, official document. She felt a small hand on her shoulder. It was Leah. Caleb and Samuel stood behind her, their faces somber in the flickering lamplight. "Don't cry, Ma," Leah whispered, her touch surprisingly steady. "We're not afraid." Caleb stepped forward, placing his beloved book on the table beside the notice. "Knowledge is a weapon, Ma. The law is made of words. We just have to find the right ones." Samuel, for once without his usual bravado, simply took her hand. "We'll be with you," he said. "We'll fight with you." Their unified strength was a lifeline. It pulled her from the depths of her despair and rekindled a spark of defiance. This was not just about a cabin. It was about their home, their dignity, their family. She would not let Blackwood shatter them. She straightened her back, wiped her tears, and looked at the three precious faces before her. Her love for them was a force of nature, an unquenchable fire. She took the silver locket from around her neck and opened it. Inside was a tiny, faded likeness of a handsome young man. A man she hadn't allowed herself to think of in years. A man whose memory was both a comfort and a wound. She snapped it shut, her resolve hardening into steel. The courtroom scene resumed, the initial shock of Samuel's outburst giving way to a tense, suffocating silence. Judge Sterling, recovering his composure, cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. "The boy will be silent," he commanded, though his voice lacked its usual iron authority. Blackwood smirked, seizing the opportunity to press his advantage. He laid out his case with cold, methodical cruelty, presenting ledgers and legal documents that painted Abigail as irresponsible and delinquent. He used words like vagrant and unfit, each one a poisoned dart aimed at her character. The town prosecutor, a man whose ambition was tethered to Blackwood's influence, echoed the sentiment, his arguments weaving a narrative of a feckless woman who was a burden on the good, hard-working people of Redemption Gulch. Abigail sat still and silent, her hands clenched in her lap, absorbing each blow. She could feel the stares of the spectators, feel their judgment. But then she felt a small hand slip into hers. Then another. She looked down to see her children flanking her, their small bodies forming a wall of unwavering support. Inside the judge's mind, a war was raging. Every legal argument presented by Blackwood was a hammer blow against the woman he was beginning to suspect he knew. He watched her, searching for the girl he once loved in the worn, tired lines of this woman's face. He saw the same determined set of her jaw, the same pride that refused to be broken. And he saw her in the faces of her children. In Caleb's studious brow, in Leah's gentle eyes, in Samuel's defiant chin. The truth was a wild horse kicking at the walls of his heart, threatening to stampede through the carefully constructed fortress of his life. He felt a bead of sweat trace a path down his temple. The air in the room was becoming thin, unbreathable. "Does the defendant have anything to say?" Judge Sterling's voice was strained. Abigail stood, her legs trembling slightly, but her voice, when it came, was clear. "Your Honor, I have not been a perfect tenant. I have fallen behind. But I have never been an unfit mother," Blackwood scoffed. "Objection! Her mothering is not on trial here, it is at the heart of everything," Abigail retorted, her voice rising with passion. "This isn't about 4 walls and a roof. It's about the home I have made for my children. A home filled with love and learning and safety." Before the judge could rule, he found himself saying something that defied all protocol. "I will hear from the children." The prosecutor shot to his feet, sputtering, but Sterling silenced him with a single, sharp look. Caleb was the first to stand, clutching his worn school folder like a shield. He spoke not with the emotion of a child, but with the startling clarity of a scholar, listing his and his siblings' academic achievements, describing the meals their mother made from almost nothing, the stories she told, the lessons she taught. "A good home is not about wealth, Your Honor," he concluded. "It is about a foundation of character. Our mother has given us the strongest foundation in the world." Then came Leah. She didn't speak of facts or achievements. She spoke of feelings. She described the way her mother's hands felt when she tended a scraped knee, the sound of her voice singing them to sleep. "Mr. Blackwood wants to take our house," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But he can't ever take our home. Because our home is our mart." Finally, Samuel stood, his eyes blazing. He pointed a small, accusing finger at the landowner. "You're a bully, Mr. Blackwood. You're rich in coin, but you're poor in spirit. My ma is the richest person I know." As Leah finished her heart-wrenching plea, she added one final, innocent detail that would detonate the carefully controlled courtroom and Marcus Sterling's entire life. "My ma tells us we have to be strong, because our pa was a strong and good man who had to go away a long time ago. She says we don't have to be sad, because she keeps him right here." Leah reached out and gently touched the silver locket at Abigail's throat. "She has his picture inside. She told us he was a dreamer, and that he had a special mark, like a little star, right here on his wrist." She pointed to her own small wrist to demonstrate. An audible gasp rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor froze mid-objection. Blackwood's smug expression faltered. But for Marcus Sterling, the world simply ceased to exist. The sounds of the courtroom faded into a dull roar. The child's words echoed in the vast, silent cavern of his soul. A star-shaped birthmark on his wrist. Without thinking, his left hand shot to his right cuff, pulling the starched white linen down over the faint, star-shaped pattern on his skin, a mark he had borne his entire life. His breath hitched. His carefully constructed world shattered into a million pieces. He lifted his gaze from the child to the mother. He looked at Abigail, truly looked at her for the first time in a decade, and saw not a stranger, but the ghost of his own forsaken past. The recognition in her eyes was a mirror of his own horror. It was a silent, devastating confession that passed between them, a decade of lies and secrets collapsing in a single, shared moment of agonizing truth. He was the man in the locket. He was their father. A profound, suffocating shame washed over Marcus Sterling, so powerful it threatened to pull him under. The gavel in his hand was no longer a symbol of power, but of his own monumental failure. The judge's robes felt like a costume, a liar's masquerade. He saw his life for what it was, a grand, empty monument built on a foundation of cowardice. He had chosen this cold, lonely prestige, over her? Over them. His children. The word was afire in his mind. He looked at their 3 small, earnest faces, and saw a legacy far greater than his sprawling ranch or his respected name, a legacy he had abandoned. The internal dam of his composure finally broke. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. The entire courtroom held its breath. "This case," he began, his voice a hoarse, unfamiliar sound. "This case is dismissed." Blackwood lunged to his feet, his face purple with rage. "On what grounds, Your Honor? This is an outrage. The law is clear." Marcus looked down at him from the bench, and for the first time, Blackwood saw not a judge, but a broken man. "The grounds," Marcus said, his voice gaining a raw, terrible strength, "are that justice is not merely an instrument of the law, but a function of morality. And I have been derelict in my moral duty. He looked directly at Abigail, his eyes pleading. There are circumstances in this case of which the court was not aware. Circumstances that demand not a legal remedy, but a personal 1 inch. He began to unbutton his judicial robes. I am recusing myself from this case, and from this bench, effective immediately. Mr. Blackwood, you will trouble this family no further. That is not a judicial order. It is a promise. The courtroom erupted into chaos, a whirlwind of shouts and gasps. But Marcus only had eyes for Abigail and the children, his children, standing together in the eye of the storm he had created. Weeks melted into a season of tentative change. The harsh, windswept landscape of Redemption Gulch began to soften with the first signs of spring, and so too did the hard ground of Abigail's heart. They no longer lived in the cramped, drafty cabin at the edge of town. Marcus, shedding his title of judge like an old skin, had insisted they move into the guest cottage on his ranch. It was a proper house, with sturdy walls, glass in every window, and a pantry that was never empty. The change was jarring, the comfort a strange, ill-fitting coat after years of wearing nothing but hardship. Marcus was a ghost in his own home at first, a figure of profound regret who kept his distance, his shame a visible aura around him. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he knew he hadn't earned it. Instead, he simply tried to be present. He started by leaving books on the porch for Caleb, books on history and science that made the boy's eyes light up. He spent afternoons watching Samuel, not interfering, but simply observing as the boy explored the vastness of the ranch. One day, he brought out a gentle old mare and wordlessly offered the reins to the boy. For Leah, he brought seedlings from his own greenhouse, lavender and chamomile, and helped her plant a new, thriving herb garden behind the cottage. He spoke little, but he listened. He learned that Caleb had his curiosity, that Leah had his mother's gentle spirit, and that Samuel had his own stubborn, defiant pride. He was building a bridge back to them, one small, hesitant stone at a time. Abigail watched it all with a cautious, guarded heart. The hurt was a deep, cold well inside her, but seeing the quiet joy on her children's faces was like sunlight on frozen water, slowly, painstakingly, causing a thaw. The healing was not a grand, dramatic event, but a series of quiet, everyday moments. It was Marcus, now just Marcus, sitting on the porch steps with Caleb, deep in a discussion about the constellations. It was the sound of Samuel's laughter as he finally learned to stay on the gentle mare, riding in clumsy circles with Marcus walking patiently beside him. It was Leah proudly presenting him with a small bundle of dried lavender from her new garden, a silent offering of peace. For Abigail, the turning point came one evening as she watched Marcus read to the children before their fire. His voice, once so full of courtroom authority, was now soft, imbued with a tenderness she thought had been buried forever. He looked up and their eyes met over the heads of their children. The question was there in his gaze, a lifetime of apology and hope held in a single look. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. It was an acknowledgement that the future did not have to be a prisoner of the past. The one-dimensional cruelty of men like Blackwood had been defeated not by law or by power, but by the undeniable truth of a family's love. The resilient underdog and her child protectors had faced down the dragon and, in doing so, had not only saved their home but had redeemed a lost and broken man, reminding him that a true legacy isn't built on land or wealth, but on the brave and difficult choice to love. The story of Abigail and her triplets became a quiet legend in Redemption Gulch, a testament to the fact that even in the dustiest, most unforgiving corners of the world, the fiercest strength is found in the bonds of family. If this story of sacrifice, truth, and redemption touched your heart, please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more inspirational stories that prove hope can always find a way.